And we continue learning Dirshu Mishnah Berurah Elchas Netilas Yadayim, and we pick it up from Sif Beis. We're in Siman Kuf Samoch up to Sif Beis, in which we're going to discuss another possul of the water for Netilas Yadayim. Says the Machaber, Asa b'mayim malacha. If you did malacha with the water, possul number 1. Possul number 2, Oisheshara b'em pitai, or use the water to dip your bread into it. Even if you had intent to soak it in Kli A, vessel A, and it fell into vessel B, psulim, it is still possul. If you cooled off wine with water, what does that mean? You took the wine bottle and you stick it into water to cool it off. Psulim, that's called utilizing the water for malacha, and the water would be possul. If you use the water to wash vessels, utensils, psulim, that's possul as well. But if the utensils were already washed, or if the utensils were new and you're just rinsing them off, ksherim, then that's not called doing malacha with it. So let's go, before we finish the sif, a lengthy sif, let's begin. The Mishnah Berurah is over here. The Mishnah Berurah explains to us, what is this possul of doing malacha with the water? Says the Mishnah Berurah, sif katan vav, malacha. Why? Because when you utilize the water to do something that you need with the water, it makes the water considered kishayvchin, as if it's something that should be spilled out, that it's standing, it's fit to be spilled out, and therefore psulim ninetila. Therefore it's possul for netila. And just to, we'll do the Dirshus afterwards. And therefore it's possul for netila. Shesharim bem pita, yisif got in zayin. The chashev, why? Because once you dip your bread into the water, it is chashev zeh melacha. That is considered melacha. V'nasa mayim shoyvchen, and again the water is considered like it's spilled out. Afilu mishavabem sharabem achar she'inoi bala mayim. Even if someone else utilizes your water to soak in it, it's still possul. So too by other malachas, it doesn't make difference if you utilize it, someone else has used it. Once the water is used water, it is possul for Netilas Yadayim. Is unsure about all of this. I feel in Iskavin Sivkatan Ches. Even to utilize the water, just not this water. However, that's when it's possul. But says the Mishnah Berurah, you don't have any intent. Something falls into the water, then kisherim. It's not considered that it was utilized, it has to be poured out. Similarly, you have a fork that falls into the water and the fork gets washed off. That wasn't your intention. Will be the same thing, and then it will not possul it for Netilas Yadayim. If a garment falls into the water, take it out. It doesn't possul the water. Again, you did not have intent. If you squeeze out water from the beged, then that water is possul. We continue with Sivkat and Taz. And you use the water to cool off wine. The chashem melacha shadei mayim. The standard is considered melacha that through the water the wine was cooled off. But let's say the wine was already cold. And you put in the water. You want to preserve. Preserving is not called malacha, that is ksherim. You put in live fish, you don't want them to die. The water is not watching them. The water is not actually doing anything. You're just preserving the current status. Even if the fish dies, it does not possul up the water. They utilize the water to wash your kilim, something stuck onto it, or to remove a bad smell from the water, then that's possul. Similar if you wash vegetables with the water. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Let's say it was already washed. Then the water is kosher. It's not called malacha. Damya, the kelim similar to kelim. If let's say you soaked vegetables so that they don't wither, the vegetables are going bad. So what do? You put it into water to preserve them. That's called. It's not just preserving. It's not just shomer them. It's bringing it back to life, and therefore it's going to be possul. If the vegetables were clean, there are just to preserve the moisture. So we're trying to figure out these vegetables which are going to go bad and you put them into the water. Is that called reviving them? Or is that merely called preserving their current status? Now again, if you have water afterwards, as we've seen already, in any scenario that you have Netilas Yadayim, which is a little bit called into question, it's always better to wash again afterwards if possible. You put kelim with a crack in order to seal it up in the summer. Use the water to measure with it. Let's say the water is sitting in a keli and it has lines on it, and you put something inside the displacement that's also called utilizing the water. Says the Mishmur, and marks off on the side of the keli, and you put something inside of it, displacement. Continues the Mishnah Brura. But if you utilize it to we're in the middle of a Mishnah Brura, middle of Sivkat in your base, you just turned over the page. That it's lesser. And if you made the water smell good, that's not called utilizing the water for something else. That's just called improving the water, and then you would still be allowed to use it for Netilas Yadayim. If you use it to wash new dishes, if there's dirt on them, then there's a tzarech and wash them and it's possul. You want to test, does the keli have a hole? So you put it inside the keli to see if there's a hole in it. It's not called that you did a malacha with the water. The water doesn't do anything. It's rather gili milsa ba'almi. You're just showing whether the utensil had a hole in it. So let's take some Dirshu's about this incredible possul of if malacha was done with the water, and we'll hopefully see some very common applications that everyone has to know about it. So we begin with Dirshu number 7, which Dirshu points out. Let's say you did malacha with ice, and then it melts and becomes water. Says the Stipler, and as well, Rav Elyashiv seems to discuss as well. Shamayim ksherim lenetilah. So again, let's finish reading. Why? The reason why the water that done malacha is called shayvchin, the reason why it's considered that when you do malacha with water, it's spilled out. It's not because it's embarrassing, it's disgusting. Shabur later on is going to write, then it's going to be kosher. So it's nothing to do with a physical characteristic that it's used, because then we'll see that even if it was done by accident, it should still be possul. There's no difference if you did it on purpose or not. But rather, the shem malacha is what possuls on the water when it's utilized for something bikavana. Because something that's called used, that's when it's spilled out. And therefore, if something happens on its own, not on purpose, then it's not going to create the possul. So therefore, says the Stipler, if we have water that comes from from ice, I don't know if I said salt before, from ice, the water is panim chadashais, to new entity. It's not called using the water. Therefore, it's not possul. Similarly, same for Pesach Tshuva, Karen LeDavid, Har Tzvi, Ar L'Tzion. Ice that melts is not a problem. It's called panu chadashais ba'olikan, and therefore, it's going to work. So now, Well, what's this relevant? This is relevant that you have a bucket of ice, and you eat some ice, you don't eat some ice, then the ice bucket melts, and now you just have a bucket of ice. That water from the bucket of ice, says the Stipler and other Yadayim, is not called water that was used, even though the ice maybe was used. Maybe I put my bottle of wine in that ice to cool off. It'd still be kosher. But to point out, this is only going to be if you took out the bottle. I shouldn't say that. Let's just open up the shayla for a moment. So again, we have a bucket of ice, and I take my bottle of wine, which is warm, I put it inside. So it cools off my bottle of wine. And therefore, it's called that whatever the entity did something for me for the wine, but because the ice then melts afterwards, it's going to be kosher. Now the chiddush is going to be that even when the ice melts afterwards, and even if the wine or the soda is still inside, then it will still be kosher. Why will it still be kosher? Because now the bottle of wine became cold. And now when it melts, it's Baruch Hadash, it's a new entity. So even though the wine is still sitting now in the freezing cold water, but at that point the wine wasn't warm anymore. It was room temperature and it's just preserving it. So the tremendous nafkamina is going to be if you have an ice chest, an ice, whatever you call them, a cooler that has ice in it, and you put cans of soda or whatnot into it, and now you want to know that you used the water that melted from that ice, based on the Stipler, because the water is panim chadasha, even though the ice is called, it did something, the ice cooled off my drinks, the water is panim chadasha, and it would be kosher for Netilas Yadayim. Continues the Dirshu over here, says the Chazon Ish number 9, what's the reason, what's this understanding? It's Nasakiv Shaychin, comes to the Shulchan Aruch, Shara Pita Mimayim, to teach us that the possul is not that you only did malacha with all the water, like you cooled something off, but rather even if you dip something in, still it's something hard to soften it. A little bit of the water is absorbed into the bread. That's considered doing malacha with the water, and therefore that's going to be a problem. Similarly, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that if you're mishtamish, if you use a little bit of the water in a large kli, you dip one finger, you have one dirty finger, and you dip it into the bucket to wash it off, that's going to be considered that all the water did work. And we'll see what we can say in Sifkat and Yud Aleph about this a little bit more. The Chazon Ish brings a raya. Even if the animal drinks from it, the water is possul due to malacha. Malacha was done with it. So too, someone else that does malacha with your water, the Mishnah Berurah is explaining, is going to have the same possul. It's not only going to be if the bailim did water. B'diavad, what if you wash your hands with this type of water? Says the Sefer Machne Yisrael, which is Chafetz Chaim, even though you have to wash your hands again, you should not make a bracha on the second Netilas Yadayim. On the second Netilas Yadayim. And we continue over here. Note number 14, that via the water it cooled off this bottle of wine. Similarly, you put something in warm water. Let's say you heat it up, you put a bottle into warm water. Says the Minchas Yitzchak that as well possuls up for washing your hands with that water. Similarly, here's the case, and you want to warm it up, something else. You have a water bottle, and you put hot water into the water bottle, and you use it to warm up your body, or to warm up the bed. It says the Karen LeDavid, that's possul, because the water did something, it was utilized to heat something up. The Minchas Yitzchak says the same. Says the Chazon Ish, when the Mishnah Berurah says if the item was room temperature, it does not possul. Says the Chazon Ish, the chalitin mitakin and mishamer, preserving, Chazon Ish not so happy about. But he says, if you put in fish in order they shall live, that's not called malacha. That part he's masking too, and the fish do not possul up the water. What about if you put water into flowers that they don't dry up, they don't die. We'll see Sivkati Nalfa Mirta Hashem. But if the dead fish stays in the water, it says the Kaf Chayim, even though your Abba is going to be maskim, that's going to be considered dirty water, and therefore you'll not be allowed to use that for Netilas Yadayim. We'll stop over here. We'll pick it up, concluding Sif Beis in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.